You ever get the feeling we're the bad guys? Captain Verk muttered, twisting the helm of the Endeavor with a hand that looked like it had seen more bar fights than command academies. His first mate Korg, a bulky slab of pessimism with an unfortunate tattoo of a unicorn on his neck, grunted. Depends, Cap. You mean bad as in morally reprehensible, or bad as in utterly screwed? Because right now, it's looking like a bit of both. The Endeavor sighed through space, its hull a patchwork of metal plates and questionable repair jobs that screamed human ingenuity, or desperation, depending on your angle. Somewhere out there, on the vast and indifferent tapestry of stars, lay New Horizon, a trade hub so notorious for its black market deals it was practically wearing a trench coat and sunglasses. Verk flicked a switch, ignoring the sputtering protest of an ancient console. Let's just say I've got a bad feeling about this blockade. Bunch of aliens with a goddamn stick up their collective asses about our cultural practices. Korg chuckled, a sound like gravel being ground under a boot. They're scared of us, Captain. All that doom and gloom, death and destruction. They're scared we'll turn their planets into our personal graveyards, Verk snorted. We can't even keep our own graveyards in order, let alone theirs. Look alive, Korg. Scanners show a blip. Probably one of those self-righteous Xyloxian patrols wanting to stop us for carrying prohibited materials. Prohibited materials, Korg repeated, voice dripping with sarcasm. Like food, water, and I don't know, oxygen. God forbid we breathe in their airspace, Verk muttered. Literally. The ship shuddered, a testament to the fact that it was held together by little more than hope and duct tape. The crew inside, a ragtag collection of the universe's least wanted, went about their duties with the enthusiasm of a three-legged dog at a cat show. Jax, the ship's gunner, poked his head through an overhead hatch, grease smearing his perpetually smirking face. Cap, you see that blip yet? It's growing like my ex-wife's alimony demands. Bigger or scarier? Verk asked, eyes fixed on the scanner. Both, Jax said, disappearing back into the bowels of the ship, presumably to argue with a stuck turret or maybe just to avoid the incoming headache. Verk watched the blip, a pulsating menace on a screen, growing more ominous with each passing second. Korg, what's the protocol for dealing with self-righteous extraterrestrial blockades that just can't take a joke? Well, Cap, usually it involves running like hell. The ship's intercom crackled, a voice dripping with disdain echoing through the narrow corridors. Attention, human vessel. This region is under Xyloxian protection. Your presence is unauthorized. Verk rolled his eyes. Xyloxian protection, more like Xyloxian extortion. You are required to submit for inspection and possible quarantine, the voice continued, a bureaucratic monotone that could bore the life out of a black hole. Quarantine my ass, Verk muttered. Jax, are we armed? A muffled shout came from somewhere below decks. Armed, yes. Functional, maybe. Story of my life, Verk sighed. All right, let's greet our new friends. With a flick of his wrist, the Endeavor spun around with the grace of a drunk dancer, aiming its somewhat functioning weapon systems in the direction of the Xyloxian patrol. On the view screen, a sleek alien ship loomed, its hull bristling with the sort of weaponry that said, "We really aren't here to offer hugs." Verk, you ever think we should just try talking to them? Korg asked, not particularly hopeful. Talk to them? Verk snorted. Look, Korg, diplomacy's just another way of saying let's waste time before shooting, and trust me, they'll shoot first and ask questions later. Cap, Jax shouted up from below, the guns are kind of online. Kind of. That's just what every captain wants to hear, Verk replied with a grimace. All right, patch me through. The intercom clicked and Verk put on his best I'm not about to commit multiple war crimes voice. Xyloxian Patrol, this is Captain Verk of the Endeavor. We're just passing through, no need for all the gunfire and drama. The alien voice returned, unimpressed. Your reputation precedes you, human. Your species' obsession with mortality is unsettling and dangerous. Oh, come on, it's not an obsession, Verk said, feigning innocence. It's more of a hobby, Korg snorted, doing his best to suppress laughter. Yeah, like collecting stamps but with more screaming. The Xyloxian patrol remained silent, a testament to their impressive alien patience, or maybe confusion. Hard to tell with all those eyes. Jax's voice crackled in again. Cap, we got incoming. Looks like they're tired of talking. Verk cursed under his breath. All right, Korg, take evasive action. Jax, get ready to return fire. The Endeavor lurched, propelled by a combination of adrenaline and whatever semblance of engineering kept it in one piece. Space lit up with the bright flashes of alien weaponry, deadly fireworks that would have been beautiful if they weren't about to kill everyone on board. You know, Verk shouted over the din, I really thought today would be less. Explodey, Korg grinned, steering the ship into a wild spin that made Verk's stomach do somersaults. And miss out on all this fun. The Xyloxian ship closed in, its sleek lines a mockery of the Endeavor's makeshift design. Captain Verk, the alien voice returned, now overlaid with the sounds of battle. Surrender now, and we will ensure a swift and peaceful resolution. Verk rolled his eyes so hard he almost saw his brain. I don't know about you, but I have a strict policy against surrendering to anyone who uses swift and peaceful in the same sentence. Jax, Korg called. We need something to show them we mean business. On it, Jax replied, and the ship shuddered as its cannons finally spat out a reluctant barrage. Amidst the chaos, Verk couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of pride. Sure, they were outgunned and outclassed, but they had something the Xyloxians didn't, a complete disregard for their own safety. Cap, Korg said through gritted teeth, we can't keep this up forever. Forever's overrated, Verk replied, eyes fixed on the enemy ship as they danced through space. Just need to hold out long enough to make them second-guess their life choices. The Xyloxian vessel pulled back, its weapons pausing as if to reassess the situation. Not that Verk was getting any delusions of grandeur. He knew when a predator was just repositioning for the kill. You think they're calling for backup? Jax asked, somewhere beneath the floor. Probably, Verk admitted. But that's a problem for later. Korg glanced at Verk with a grin that said he'd rather be anywhere else but here, yet somehow wouldn't miss it for the universe. So what's the plan, Cap? Survive, Verk replied, hands gripping the helm with the desperation of a man who knew his life was worth more as a statistic in a casualty report than any damn hero's tale. The Endeavor weaved through the stars, leaving behind a trail of defiance and debris. Around them, the void of space seemed almost to laugh, a soundless mocking echo of their struggle. Next time, Verk growled, let's take the scenic route. Korg laughed, a sound filled with the kind of madness that only comes from staring death in the face and giving it the finger. Scenic route, he says. We'll be lucky if we get to retire on a nice quiet asteroid. Verk nodded, staring out at the infinite expanse of space and the encroaching shadows of their pursuers. As long as it's got a bar, Korg, as long as it's got a bar. The Xyloxian ship loomed closer again, a relentless juggernaut of alien engineering. Verk knew they were playing a deadly game of cat and mouse, and sooner or later the cat would get bored of toying with its catch. The tension twisted in the air, electric and taut. Verk's mind raced, searching for a plan, any plan that could pull them out of this mess. Korg, Verk said suddenly, a spark of reckless inspiration igniting in his eyes, remember that old trick we talked about? The one that involves more insanity than sense. Korg raised an eyebrow, a wicked grin beginning to form. You mean the one that could either save our asses or turn us into stardust? That's the one, Verk confirmed, his voice hardening with resolve. Sounds like just the kind of thing we'd do, Korg agreed, already flipping switches and prepping systems Verk hadn't seen used outside a manual. Jax's voice echoed from below. Whatever you're planning, make it fast. We're running out of not dead time. Copy that, Verk replied, gripping the helm tighter. All right, on my mark. The Endeavor shook violently, and suddenly, with a burst of improbable speed, the ship careened towards the Xyloxian vessel. It was a maneuver that defied logic, embracing chaos instead, a mad dash towards survival. For the record, Korg shouted over the noise, this is a terrible idea. Probably, Verk admitted, grinning like a lunatic. But it's our terrible idea. The alien ship fired in response, its weapons lighting up the void, cutting through space towards the charging Endeavor. But Verk and his crew were betting everything on a slim hope, a tiny sliver of space-time anomaly known only to those who traded in desperation. As the Endeavor reached the brink, Verk shouted, "Now!" And Korg slammed his hand down on a button that should probably have been labeled, "Do not press unless suicidal." The universe hiccupped. Space warped around them, reality stretching like taffy in the hands of a cosmic toddler. Stars blurred, weapons fire fizzled, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, everything went quiet. The Endeavor emerged on the other side, battered and barely holding together but undeniably alive. Verk laughed, a wild, unhinged sound that was more relief than victory. The Xyloxian ship, still searching the previous coordinates, was left staring at empty space. Verk could almost imagine their confusion, and it brought a wicked smile to his face. "Tell me we're not dead," Jax's voice came up, almost hopeful. "Not today," Verk replied, slumping back in his chair. Korg checked the systems, shaking his head. "We made it, Cap." Verk let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Remind me never to do that again," he said, voice shaky with adrenaline. Korg grinned wider. "We should do it again." Verk laughed, the sound echoing through the bridge, mingling with the familiar creaks and groans of the Endeavor as it drifted into the safety of open space once more. And behind them, the universe continued its silent, indifferent dance, as if mocking them for daring to survive another day. The Endeavor limped into the docking bay of New Horizon like a wounded animal, trailing its dignity behind it. Scrapes and dents adorned its hull, making it look like it had gone 12 rounds with a particularly aggressive asteroid belt. Captain Verk shook his head, muttering something about how duct tape was hardly a valid substitute for engineering. But here they were, alive, which in his book was a victory worth toasting. Not that there'd be much of that around here. New Horizons trade hub was notorious not just for its black market deals, but for its questionable hospitality. Verk had always felt that if you couldn't get stabbed in a bar, it wasn't a bar worth going to. Luckily, New Horizons establishments were full of life-threatening excitement. "All right, gang, let's try not to get arrested or killed," Verk announced as he disembarked, his cheery demeanor at odds with his words. "We're here to meet an alien emissary, Suler. Try not to start a diplomatic incident. Or do. It might be fun." Korg stretched and grimaced, his unicorn tattoo peeking out from his collar like it was ashamed to be seen with him. "Diplomatic incidents are our specialty, Cap. Should have seen that last party we crashed. Pretty sure that wasn't a party, Korg. More of a wake." "Not that they knew it when we got there," Verk replied with a smirk. Jax joined them, wiping grease from his hands, his expression somewhere between bored and homicidal. "I'll keep the guns warm, just in case." As they made their way through the bustling corridors of the trade hub, the cacophony of languages and cultures was almost overwhelming. Verk always found it amusing how universal chaos felt, no matter which corner of the galaxy you were in. They entered a dimly lit chamber, where an alien awaited them. Suler was the color of a sickly sunset, with too many limbs and not enough patience. He eyed Verk and his crew with the kind of disdain usually reserved for finding a hair in your soup. "Captain Verk," Suler said, his voice dripping with the kind of superiority that only comes naturally to those who've never been punched in the face. "Your reputation is significant, meaning you're surprised we're not dead yet," Verk replied with a grin that had been the death of many a poker face. "Indeed," Suler continued, unfazed. "Your species' fascination with mortality is concerning." "Well, we like to keep ourselves entertained," Verk said, leaning against a bulkhead with the nonchalance of someone who'd decided long ago that the universe was out to get him, and he may as well enjoy the ride. "Speaking of entertainment," Korg added, "we heard you guys have a great sense of humor. Any chance you're hiding it somewhere?" Suler blinked, a slow, deliberate movement. Humor is not our priority, Captain. Avoiding unnecessary conflict, however, is conflict us. Werk feigned shock. We're peace-loving folks. Just ask anyone who survived meeting us. The alien emissary seemed to hesitate, which Werk took as a sign of progress, or confusion. With aliens, it was hard to tell the difference. We have concerns, Suler said finally. Your concept of cultural practices is alarming. Ah, yes, Werk said, nodding sagely. You mean our habit of throwing parties with more alcohol than sense? Amongst other things, Suler replied, his tone suggesting that humans and their antics were only slightly less dangerous than a star-going supernova. Look, we're not here to cause trouble, Werk assured him. Just passing through. Maybe pick up a few trinkets. As long as no one starts waving guns around, we should all get along just fine. Suler's eyes narrowed. Your assurances are noted. However, your kind's unpredictability is, before he could finish. A loud crash echoed through the chamber. Werk turned to see a group of Xyloxians, those charming bastards from earlier, barging in with all the elegance of a bull in a china shop. Captain Werk, the lead Xyloxian barked, its voice a low rumble that promised nothing good. You were warned, yeah. Well, Werk said, stepping forward with his most diplomatic grin, we don't really do warnings. Suler shifted uncomfortably, caught between a rock and a hard place, or in this case between Werk and a squad of trigger-happy aliens. This is not the place for violence, he interjected, but it was clear no one was listening. The Xyloxian leader glared at Werk. Your kind is reckless, a danger to all, and you're just a ray of sunshine, aren't you? Werk shot back, rolling his eyes. Look, we're not here to fight, but if you insist, the Xyloxians seem to take this as an invitation, weapons primed and ready. Werk sighed. Korg, Jax, you know what to do. Jax had already drawn a pair of pistols that looked like they'd seen better days but had a reputation for getting the job done. Korg, opting for the more personal touch, cracked his knuckles, his grin dangerously wide. Suler tried one last time to mediate. There's no need for this. We can discuss. Talk is cheap, Werk interrupted. And we're running a bit low on patience. The ensuing skirmish was more of a chaotic dance than a battle, with Werk and his crew weaving between Xyloxians, making up in creativity what they lacked in finesse. The air was filled with the sound of gunfire and the odd curse, Werk's favorite kind of music. Amidst the chaos, Werk realized that the Xyloxians weren't just blindly aggressive, they were scared. The misunderstanding, it seemed, lay in their perception of human intentions. To them, humans were loose cannons, unpredictable and prone to violence, a stereotype Werk found both flattering and mildly insulting. Okay, time out. Werk shouted, ducking a wild shot that passed close enough to singe his hair. Can we just discuss this like civilized beings before someone loses a limb? The Xyloxian leader hesitated, and for a moment the madness paused. Werk seized the opportunity, lowering his weapon. Listen, I get that you're concerned, but we're not here to cause trouble. Not intentionally, anyway. Suler stepped forward, seizing the chance to regain control. Perhaps there is room for understanding. If Captain Werk can assure us that his crew will refrain from cultural expressions, Werk considered this, the irony not lost on him. You have my word, he said, his tone suggesting that his word was about as reliable as a politician's promise. But it seemed to satisfy the Xyloxians, who begrudgingly lowered their weapons. Korg, ever the opportunist, piped up. Does this mean we're invited to the next diplomatic shindig? I hear those are a real hoot. The Xyloxian leader almost smiled, though it was hard to tell with all those teeth. Perhaps. If you promise to behave. Define behave, Jax muttered, holstering his weapons but keeping his hands ready. With the tension finally easing, Werk turned to Suler, who was watching the scene with a mixture of relief and disbelief. See. No need for bloodshed. Just a little misunderstanding. Your methods are unorthodox, Suler admitted, his tone softening. But effective, it seems. Story of my life, Werk chuckled. Now about those trinkets. Suler sighed, a sound that conveyed more resignation than exasperation. Let us discuss it over a meal. Something. Soothing, perhaps, sounds good, Verk agreed. And if there's a bar, even better. As they followed Suler to what was hopefully a less hostile part of New Horizon, Verk couldn't help but feel a certain fondness for the chaotic life he led. Sure, they were constantly teetering on the brink of disaster, but at least things were never boring. Beside him, Korg clapped a hand on his shoulder. You know, Cap, if this whole space pirate gig doesn't work out, you make a hell of a diplomat, Verk snorted. With my track record, I'd be lucky to get a job as a janitor. Still, Jax added, not a bad day's work for a bunch of outlaws. With the promise of a meal and perhaps some well-deserved rest, they walked through the bustling corridors of New Horizon, far from home but feeling in their own way like they'd found a place in the universe. And somewhere among the stars, the void chuckled, a silent, cosmic joke only those who dared could hear. Verk leaned back in his chair, balancing it precariously on its two hind legs. He was in the Endeavor's cockpit, staring at a monitor so ancient even the dust on it was fossilized. The screen flickered, the ship's old console groaning in protest as he tried to coax some cooperation out of it. It reminded him of a grumpy old man, only this one came with a side of impending explosion. Bloody thing's as cooperative as a cornered cat, he muttered, giving it a tap that was more hope than technique. The screen's static resolved into a semblance of clarity, showing a map of the galaxy's major trade routes. Or, as Verk liked to call it, the intergalactic highway, only with more space pirates and fewer speed limits. Korg ambled in, his unicorn tattoo peeking out with that perpetual look of regret. Hey, Cap, we planning on taking the scenic route back to almost getting killed, or are we sticking to the usual definitely getting killed path? Depends, Verk replied, eyes still glued to the screen. I just found out our alien friends are planning to cut us off from the highway. Permanently? Korg whistled low, the kind of sound you'd expect right before someone gets bad news delivered in a really expensive envelope. Well, that's one way to say they don't like us. What's the plan, boss? Verk sighed, a sound that contained the weight of 1,000 exasperations. Adapt, improvise, and try not to get vaporized. Jack stuck his head in, his expression perpetually fixed somewhere between grim determination and I haven't slept in a week. If we're gonna improvise, we might need more than just spit and duct tape this time. We've got more than that, Verk said, a mischievous glint in his eyes. We've got human ingenuity. Yeah, and a ship held together by hope and whatever was stuck in Korg's boots last week, Jack shot back, crossing his arms. Right, Verk said, ignoring the sarcasm. So here's what we do. We retrofit the Endeavor with cloaking tech. We sneak past the checkpoint and nobody knows we're here until we're long gone. Cloaking tech, Korg raised an eyebrow. You mean like one of those fancy stealth ships? The kind the military probably wouldn't sell us even if we asked nicely. Exactly, Verk replied, unfazed. But nobody said we had to buy it, we just have to build it. And where exactly are we getting parts for this DIY disaster? Jax asked, leaning against the doorframe with a dubious look. We scavenge, Verk said, shrugging. New Horizons got a scrapyard big enough to hide a fleet. We just need to be creative. Or insane, Jax muttered. Verk grinned. Same thing sometimes. Korg nodded, his grin as wide as the galaxy. Sounds like a plan, Cap. Let's get shopping. Their first stop was, predictably, New Horizons' sprawling junkyard, a graveyard of technology left to rust in the artificial sun. It stretched out as far as the eye could see, a landscape of broken dreams and discarded ambitions. Look at all this, Verk said, gesturing expansively. One man's trash is another man's. Well, slightly better trash, maybe. Jax cracked a rare smile. Feels like home. They waded through the mechanical debris, picking through the detritus of countless failed enterprises. Verk found a panel with some promise, a relic from a cloaking device if the faded serial numbers were anything to go by. This'll do, he said, tossing it to Korg, who caught it with practiced ease. We'll need a few more pieces to Frankenstein this together. Frankenstein? Korg frowned, unfamiliar with the reference. Is that another one of those ancient Earth deities you keep talking about? Close enough, Verk chuckled. Let's find the rest of the parts before our alien friends realize we're up to something. Hours later, they returned to the Endeavor, arms full of scavenged bits and bobs that might just do the trick. Jax immediately set to work, his natural habitat being elbow-deep in machinery. The ship's engine room filled with the sound of welding and cursing, a symphony of progress according to Jax's own unique scale. "So how's the miracle coming along?" Verk asked, leaning against the doorway with a mug of what passed for coffee on this side of the galaxy. "If by miracle you mean technological abomination, then we're right on schedule," Jax grumbled, tightening a bolt with the enthusiasm of a man adjusting his own noose. "Perfect," Verk said, sipping his coffee, which tasted like it had been filtered through a sock. "As long as it keeps us hidden from those alien bastards." Korg appeared, holding a sparking wire like it was a venomous snake. "So, does this go in the make us invisible box or the blow up spectacularly box?" "Definitely the latter," Jax said without looking up. "And please, for the love of whatever gods are listening, don't mix them up." Verk watched, amused, as his crew cobbled together their solution with equal parts ingenuity and desperation. It wasn't pretty, but then again, neither was war, and they were hoping to avoid at least one of those things. Finally, after what felt like years but was probably just an interminable few hours, Jack stepped back, wiping his brow. "It's done, or as done as it's ever gonna be." Verk clapped him on the back, ignoring the way Jax winced. "Good job. Now let's see if this thing works." They booted up the cloaking device, the console grumbling like a disgruntled bear. The ship shimmered, the light bending around it in a way that was almost magical if one was prone to poetic thinking. It was a sight to behold, assuming anyone was actually looking, which was precisely the point. "Look at that," Korg said, his tone somewhere between awe and disbelief. "We're like ghosts." "Yeah," Jax added, a hint of pride in his voice despite himself. "Ghosts that could explode at any moment, but still." Verk grinned. "All right, let's test this out. Set a course for the highway. We've got places to be, and I'm not keen on sticking around for another friendly chat with our alien pals." The ship glided forward, silent and unseen, a shadow passing through the void. As they approached the checkpoint, tension hung in the air like a bad smell, thick and inescapable. "Let's keep our fingers crossed," Verk said, though he was well aware that crossing one's fingers in space was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. The Endeavor slipped past the checkpoint without so much as a blip on the radar. It was almost anticlimactic, like slipping out of a party just before the cops showed up. Except in this case, the cops were heavily armed aliens with a penchant for disintegrating first and asking questions never. "We're clear," Jax reported, his voice betraying just the slightest hint of relief. "Looks like your mad plan actually worked, Cap." "Of course it did," Verk replied with a smirk that bordered on smug. "I'm nothing if not reliable," Korg snorted. "Reliable like a grenade with a missing pin, maybe." They sailed on, the vast expanse of space stretching out before them. They'd done it. They'd adapted, improvised, and, most importantly, survived. For now, anyway. As the stars zipped past, Verk leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a moment of smug satisfaction. Sure, they were probably one short circuit away from turning into space debris, but that was a problem for future Verk. Present Verk was just happy to be alive. "Well, boys," he said, raising his coffee mug in what could generously be called a toast, "here's to human ingenuity, and to not dying horribly. At least not today." The others raised their mugs, a motley crew of misfits in a ship that defied all odds. They were outlaws, renegades, and occasionally idiots. But they were alive, and in this universe that was a rare and precious thing. "To not dying," Korg echoed, his grin as wide as the quantum divide. "And to finding a way out of this mess," Jax added, though his expression suggested he wasn't quite convinced that was possible. As the Endeavor sailed on into the darkness, Verk couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie with his crew. They might have been on the wrong side of every law imaginable, but at least they were on the right side of each other. And somewhere, far off in the cosmos, the universe chuckled, a silent, cosmic jest only the truly insane could appreciate. The universe, it seemed, had a rather twisted sense of humor. Just as the Endeavour made a clean, albeit miraculous, getaway from the checkpoint, the intergalactic highway threw a curveball their way. An ominous hissing filled the cockpit, a sound that in any other setting might precede a comedic pratfall, but in space, it was usually followed by explosive decompression or a lawsuit. Verk, ever the optimist, or perhaps simply resigned to his fate, glanced around. "Jax, you got any idea what that noise is? Or should we just assume it's the universe's way of telling us to duck and cover?" Jax, frowning like a man who'd just been told his bar tab couldn't be settled in IOU, punched a few keys on the ancient console. "Sounds like one of the airlocks is having a midlife crisis. Maybe it's contemplating early retirement. Or maybe it just wants a vacation," Korg chimed in, his unicorn tattoo almost glowing under the cockpit's flickering lights. "Preferably somewhere without the risk of being turned into cosmic confetti." "Well, if it wants a break, it's in the wrong line of work," Verk replied, peering at the dodgy monitor as if it could offer up some divine insight. "And so are we if it comes to that." The console beeped, an angry, insistent noise that suggested whatever was wrong wasn't going to fix itself. An alert flashed on the screen informing them of an incoming message. It was from the alien coalition blockade they just so cleverly bypassed. Verk sighed. "I bet they're not sending us a fruit basket." "Maybe it's a suggestion we return to sender," Jax muttered. With extreme prejudice. On the screen, the angular visage of Suler, their reticent alien acquaintance, appeared, looking as pleased as a cat thrown into a pool. "Captain Verk," Suler began, his voice as smooth as broken glass. "I see you've been busy." Verk grinned, a sharp, dangerous sort of smile. "Suler, lovely to see you. We were just talking about you." "Well, not you specifically, but you know, your charming blockade." Suler's expression didn't change. It was like trying to read emotion on a rock face. "You should turn back. The blockade is equipped with the latest in detection technology. You cannot hide." "We'll take our chances," Verk replied, ever the gambler. "After all, we've managed this far on luck and questionable decisions." Suler's eyes narrowed. "Questionable decisions will get you killed, Captain." "True," Verk conceded. "But they also make for the best stories." Suler cut the transmission, leaving the crew in the dim glow of the cockpit. The silence was thick, the kind that was only possible amongst people who shared a mutual understanding of their impending doom. "So, we're up against advanced alien tech," Korg said, breaking the quiet. "Anyone else feeling just a little outclassed right now?" "We've been outclassed since the day we left Earth," Jax said, returning to the console with a shrug. "But here we are, still kicking, still breathing." "That's the spirit," Verk said, though even he had to admit their odds were looking dodgier than a credit chit in a scam artist's pocket. The Endeavour continued its silent glide through space, the stars indifferent to the drama unfolding aboard the creaky vessel. That was the thing about space. It didn't take sides, didn't play favorites. It just was. As they approached the next checkpoint, the alien technology came to life with an eerie precision. It was like watching a tiger wake up before realizing you were locked in the cage with it. The blockade's detection arrays spun up, their lights cutting through the void with a predatory gleam. "Time to see if our little trick holds up against their gadgets," Verk said, a hint of grim determination in his voice. Jax tapped a few keys, his fingers dancing across the console as if trying to coax cooperation out of a particularly stubborn mule. "Cloaking field stable, but I wouldn't bet my last meal on it staying that way." Korg, ever the optimist or perhaps just resigned to the absurdity of their situation, leaned back in his chair. "Whatever happens, it was nice knowing you guys, especially if this ends up being our last hurrah." "Save the eulogies for later," Verk said, though he couldn't help but appreciate Korg's flair for the dramatic. "We're not dead yet." The Endeavour slipped into the blockade's detection zone, the tension in the cockpit thick enough to chew on. Lights blinked in console's word, the alien tech searching, probing, looking for any sign of the intruders. "Hold your breath, everyone," Jax said, his eyes on the readouts. "Might help if we pretend we're not here." The ship moved forward, and for a moment everything held its breath, machines and men alike caught in the balance. The alien tech pulsed once more, then fell silent. They'd done it. For the second time in as many days they had defied the odds. "Well, I'll be damned," Korg said, a grin spreading across his face. "Looks like we just pulled off the impossible." "Not impossible," Verk corrected, though his own smile was one of relief. "Just improbable. Suler's going to be pissed," Jax noted, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "Let him be," Verk said, stretching his arms as if shedding the weight of their narrow escape. "Pissed is better than disintegrated. And besides, what's life without a little spice?" The ship sailed on, leaving the alien blockade and all its high-tech wizardry behind. They might have been running a gauntlet, but sometimes the best way through a problem was to barrel straight at it and hope it blinked first. "All right, next stop," Verk said, settling back into his chair. "Let's find a cozy little corner of the universe where nobody wants to kill us for a while." "Good luck with that," Jax said, his tone all dry wit and weary humor. "Peaceful corners aren't exactly our style." "And who wants peace anyway?" Korg added, his grin as infectious as ever. "Boring as hell." They shared a moment of laughter, the kind that comes not from true humor but from the sheer relief of having survived once again. Against all odds they were still here, still fighting, still the ragtag crew of the Endeavor. As they slipped further away from the blockade, Verk allowed himself a moment to reflect. Sure, they were outlaws, rebels without a cause, and a few sandwiches short of a picnic. But they were also a team, a family of sorts, bound together by shared hardship and mutual respect. And if the universe was laughing at them, well, let it. They'd laugh right back, with all the defiance of humanity's stubborn refusal to go quietly into that good night. "To improbable victories," Verk said, raising his mug once more. "And to whatever fresh hell the galaxy throws at us next." The crew joined in the toast, their mugs clinking in a gesture that was as much about hope as it was about defiance. They were still here, and that was something worth celebrating. As the Endeavor sailed on, a shadow in the vastness of space, the crew knew one thing for sure: whatever came next, they'd face it together. And they'd do it with a smile, a quip, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of luck. And sometimes, in a universe as chaotic and unpredictable as theirs, that was all you could ask for. The moment they cleared the blockade, it should have been smooth sailing. But the universe, that cosmic prankster, had other plans. Just as Verk was about to relax, the ship jolted violently, like a drunk staggering into a bar brawl. The warning sirens blared, an overloud cacophony that made even the sound of nails on a chalkboard seem like a sweet lullaby. "Damn it, Jax." "What's going on?" Verk barked, clutching the edges of his seat as the Endeavor lurched again, clearly vying for the title of worst rides in the galaxy. Jax, his face set in the deep frown of a man asked to dance sober at his own funeral, slammed a few buttons on the ancient console. "Looks like someone's taking potshots at us. And they ain't using pea shooters." "Fantastic," Korg said, rubbing his tattooed arms with a grin that suggested he found their predicament more thrilling than terrifying. "Means we're still important enough to shoot at. Or too annoying to ignore," Verk muttered, trying to focus as the ship shuddered again. "Can we return fire?" Jax shook his head, his fingers still flying over the controls. "Guns are jammed. Shields are about as useful as a chocolate teapot right now." "Great," Verk sighed. "Looks like we're in for a good, old-fashioned beating." Korg chuckled, proving once again that the line between bravery and idiocy was often as thin as the ship's hull. Nothing like a little existential threat to spice up the day, eh? Meanwhile, the Endeavor danced through space, dodging laser fire that lit up the darkness like an impromptu fireworks display. The shots came from a sleek, predatory ship that looked like it could chew up the Endeavor and spit out the rust. "Anyone feel like we're a bit out of our league here?" Jax asked as he futilely tried to coax more speed from their beleaguered engines. "More like we're playing in a different sport," Verk replied, glancing at the enemy ship closing in. "And not the fun kind with balls, beer, and questionable decisions." The Endeavor took another hit, and the lights flickered ominously. The ship was starting to feel less like a home and more like a coffin, but Verk wasn't ready to call it quits, not just yet. "All right, team," he said, trying to summon some semblance of leadership in the face of what looked like their last stand. "Ideas. Start praying," Korg suggested, though the grin hadn't quite left his face. "Not our style," Verk shot back. Jax shrugged, his expression a mix of resignation and stubbornness. "We could try ducking into the asteroid field over there. It's a long shot, but maybe we can lose them." "An asteroid field?" Verk raised an eyebrow. "You know I hate those. Every time we go into one, it turns into a demolition derby." "Better than sitting here waiting to get vaporized," Jax countered, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Verk considered the options, which were rapidly disappearing like cookies at a kid's party. "All right, let's do it. Korg, hold on to your unicorn." The Endeavor veered hard to starboard, aiming for the asteroid field that loomed ahead like a stone graveyard. The alien ship behind them followed, relentless in its pursuit. The field was dense, a chaotic maze of tumbling rocks and space debris, each one a potential catastrophe. The Endeavor weaved through it, engines whining in protest. Verk's knuckles were white on the controls, his teeth gritted as he maneuvered their clunky steed through the chaotic dance of asteroids. The alien ship, sleek and deadly, wasn't deterred. It followed them in, blasting away at the asteroids that dared come too close. "These guys just don't give up, do they?" Korg said, sounding almost impressed. "I guess they really want to make sure we're dead," Jax replied, his focus on the console as if sheer concentration could keep them alive. "Well, I'd hate to disappoint," Verk grunted, jerking the controls to avoid a particularly aggressive asteroid. The ship took another hit and something sparked, the smell of burning circuits filling the cockpit. The Endeavor was coming apart at the seams, held together by nothing but duct tape and sheer bloody-mindedness. "Shields are down," Jax warned, a note of panic in his usually calm voice. "Notice anything else, genius?" Verk snapped, though the sarcasm was more about masking fear than genuine irritation. "We're running out of places to hide," Jax said, ignoring the jab. "If we don't shake them soon, we're toast." "Then we better get creative," Verk said, steering them closer to one of the larger asteroids, hoping to lose their tail in its shadow. At that moment, Suler's face reappeared on the cracked monitor, looking as pleased as a tax collector at a party. "Captain Verk, you persist in making poor choices." "Hello to you too, Suler," Verk growled, trying to keep the ship from becoming a permanent fixture in the asteroid field. "If you're here to rub salt in the wound, can it wait? We're a bit busy not dying right now." "It seems that your bravado has finally caught up with you," Suler observed, his voice as smug as a cat in a sunbeam. "Yeah, well, tell the Afterlife Committee to hold our reservations," Verk shot back. "I'm not ready to check out just yet." The transmission cut out, leaving them alone once more with their impending doom. Verk forced himself to focus, his mind racing. They needed a plan, something that would turn the tables. But all he had was a failing ship and a stubborn crew who refused to give up. Another blast rocked the ship, and Verk felt the controls shudder in his grip. This wasn't just a fight. It was a slow, grinding defeat, each hit knocking another piece off their chances of survival. "All right," Verk said, his voice a mix of desperation and determination. "We need to get out of this field and find a place to regroup." "And how do you propose we do that?" Jax asked. "In case you haven't noticed, we're fresh out of miracles." "Not yet," Verk said, glancing at Korg. "You still got that emergency stash?" Korg's grin returned, a hint of mischief lighting his eyes. "You mean the one we were saving for a rainy day?" "Consider this a monsoon," Verk replied. Korg nodded, darting out of the cockpit to a hidden compartment in the rear of the ship. He returned moments later with a small, heavily secured case. "You're sure about this?" Jax asked, eyeing the case like it contained a rabid animal. "We don't have a choice," Verk said, taking the case and opening it to reveal several small, glowing devices. "If this works, we might just have a fighting chance. And if it doesn't," Verk grinned, a tight, humorless expression, "then at least we'll go out with a bang." With careful hands, Verk began placing the devices around the ship, each one a small bundle of highly unstable energy. It was a risky move, a gamble with their lives as the stakes. As the last device was set, Verk returned to the cockpit, his expression one of grim resolve. "All right, let's see if we can give our friends a little surprise." Korg and Jax exchanged glances but said nothing, their trust implicit despite the madness of the plan. Verk took the controls, aiming them towards the edge of the asteroid field, where open space and potential escape lay beyond. The alien ship followed, relentless and sure of its victory. Verk waited, timing their move with the precision of a gambler throwing dice. As they cleared the field, he hit the switch, detonating the devices behind them. The explosion was a spectacular blaze of light and debris, a temporary barrier that momentarily obscured the alien ship and gave them a slim window of opportunity. "Now, Jax," Verk shouted, pushing the engines to their limit. Jax engaged the thrusters, the Endeavour lurching forward with a surge of speed that was more desperation than engineering. They shot away from the explosion, leaving chaos in their wake. For a moment, it seemed as if they might have actually pulled it off. But then the alien ship emerged from the debris, battered but still functional, its weapons locking onto them once more. "Damn, these guys are persistent," Korg muttered, his grin finally slipping. "Yeah, they really don't know when to quit," Verk agreed, watching as their last hope slipped away. In that moment, as all seemed lost, the Endeavour shuddered again, but this time it wasn't from an attack. Verk stared at the console, disbelief battling with hope. "What's happening?" Jax asked, his fingers flying over the controls in a desperate attempt to understand. Verk glanced at the monitor, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Looks like we're getting some help after all." On the screen, a new ship appeared, its lines sleek and deadly. It was one of the Coalition's own, and it opened fire on their pursuers with ruthless efficiency. The tables had turned, and for the first time it was their enemies who were on the defensive. "That's our cue," Verk said, steering their battered ship away from the battle. As they limped away, leaving the chaos behind, Verk allowed himself a moment of relief. They'd escaped by the skin of their teeth, and while the stakes were still high for now, they had a chance to breathe. "And here I thought today was gonna be boring," Korg said, his grin back in full force. "Yeah, well, next time let's aim for a little less excitement," Jax replied, though a hint of a smile played on his lips. Verk laughed, the sound a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, a ragtag crew in an unforgiving universe, united against the odds. "To improbable victories," he said, echoing their earlier toast. And as the Endeavour sailed on through the stars, he knew one thing for certain: they'd keep fighting, keep laughing, and against all odds, they'd keep flying. The Endeavour limped through space like a wounded dog that had just managed to outrun a bigger, meaner dog. Verk sat slumped in the captain's chair, trying to decide if he was more relieved to be alive or more annoyed that he'd have to keep dealing with the universe's crap for a little while longer. Jax was busy nursing the ship's ancient console, which seemed to be held together by spite and whatever sticky substance he'd found lodged under the control panel. Korg was back to staring out the viewport, probably wondering when their next adrenaline-pumping disaster would roll around. "All right, folks, we need a plan," Verk announced, as if he had a plan or a clue. "Something that doesn't involve us getting blown to bits, like running away." Jax suggested, not even looking up from the console he was trying to coax life out of. "Running away is a kind of plan," Verk conceded. "But it's lacking in certain areas, like dignity, and options for the future that don't involve more running." Korg drummed his fingers on the armrest, clearly uninterested in dignity. What about finding someone who actually likes us for a change? Maybe we can call in a favor. Didn't know we had any friends left out there, Jax muttered as he smacked the console, eliciting a hopeful beep. More like someone who owes us and doesn't hate our guts, Verk added dryly. We've got a few of those. They all let that thought dangle like a piece of mystery meat in space soup. It was true, though. Somewhere in the galaxy, there must be at least one alien entity that found their antics more amusing than infuriating, or at the very least, saw them as useful idiots. Remember that guy, Thraxon? Korg mused. We did him a solid back on New Horizon. He's bound to still be grateful, or at least not actively plotting our demise. Verk scratched his chin, trying to recall something other than Thraxon's unfortunate body odor. Yeah, Thraxon, he owes us a favor. Kind of. I think he said something about it between bouts of over-explaining the finer points of illegal octopod fighting. Worth a shot, Jax said with a shrug that echoed through the cockpit like a defeated sigh. He might at least give us a heads up if someone's planning to atomize us. What the hell, let's do it, Verk decided, with all the enthusiasm of a man opting to jump off a cliff simply because standing still was even less appealing. Jax, see if you can get a message to Thraxon. Let him know we're still alive and could use a little friendly assistance. On it, Jax replied, bending over the console with a grimace that suggested he was about to perform surgery with a rusty spoon. Korg leaned back, legs kicked up on the nearest surface, looking like a man waiting for a bomb to go off just so he could say, "I told you so." You think Thraxon's gonna help us? I mean, other than by mistake, Verk chuckled, though it was more of a grunt. Who knows? Maybe he's got a soft spot for underdogs, or he just likes watching us dig our own graves, Jax interjected, tapping buttons like he was trying to summon a genie. Message sent. Great, Verk replied. Now we wait and hope he was in a good mood when he got it. The waiting game was, predictably, about as exciting as watching a wormhole form in reverse. Hours ticked by, each one a reminder that they were floating on a bucket of bolts with less chance of long-term survival than a snowflake in a volcano. Finally, the console crackled to life. The voice that emerged was as slimy and smug as Verk remembered. Captain Verk, can't say I expected to hear from you again. Alive, at least, Thraxon, you old space rat, Verk exclaimed, trying to sound more enthusiastic and less desperate. Still in the shadiest part of the galaxy, I see. Where else would I be? Thraxon chuckled, a sound like gravel in a blender. So, what brings you to my humble frequencies? You finally ready to join the octopod circuit and tempting. But no, Verk replied, his attempt at humor as dry as a Martian summer. We're in a bit of a bind. Could use some help slipping past a rather persistent pack of enemies. Figured maybe you could point us in the right direction. Thraxon let out a long, thoughtful hum that sounded like he was either seriously considering their plight or just trying to decide what to have for lunch. Well, I do owe you one, and I happen to have a little intel that might interest you. Let's hear it, Verk said, leaning forward like a gambler waiting for the dealer to flip the card. There's a certain captain in the coalition, Thraxon began, each word oozing with the promise of something potentially useful. Named Zarn, bit of a rebel even by their standards. Rumor is he's fascinated with humans. Finds your stubbornness intriguing, does he now? Verk replied, eyebrows raised in skepticism. And how exactly does that help us? Well, Thraxon continued, sounding like a salesman about to close a deal. He's been looking to make contact with someone like you. Someone who can show him just how tenacious humans can be. And this doesn't sound like a trap because, Thraxon said with a grin in his voice, he's more interested in what you can do together than what his superiors might say. You meet him, you might find yourself with a rare ally. Verk exchanged a glance with his crew. It was a risk, sure, but since when had that stopped them before? Where can we find this Zarn? Verk asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the new flutter of hope in his chest. Thraxon gave them the coordinates with all the casualness of someone handing out directions to the nearest diner. Tell him I sent you. He might not shoot you on sight. Thanks, Thraxon, Verk said, trying not to sound too relieved. I owe you one. Just remember that when you're king of the galaxy, Thraxon replied with a chuckle before the transmission cut out. Well, crew, looks like we've got a date with destiny, Verk announced, standing up and stretching as if to shake off the weariness of their last encounter. Let's hope this Zarn is more interested in conversation than incineration, Korg snorted. With our luck, he's probably got a thing for barbecue. Human-flavored. I'm game, Jack said, his fingers already working to plot the course. Not like the universe has given us a break for being polite and cautious. That's the spirit, Verk replied, feeling a flicker of camaraderie spark in the gloom. Jax, get us moving. Korg, try not to break anything until we get there. As the Endeavor began its ponderous journey toward the coordinates Thraxon had given them, Verk allowed himself a rare moment of optimism. It was the kind of optimism that could easily be shattered by a well-aimed laser, but it was something to cling to in the void. The ship creaked and groaned, a reminder of its age and the toll of their recent escape. But for now, it was still flying, and so were they. Iors passed like seconds in the vacuum of space, the only sound the persistent hum of the engines and the occasional muttered curse from Jax as he coaxed more life from the console. Korg dozed in his seat, a picture of relaxation despite the impending rendezvous with an alien captain who might or might not be their salvation. Finally, they approached the coordinates. The system was a backwater, the kind of place where the locals minded their own business and expected you to do the same. Perfect for clandestine meetings and other questionable activities. As the Endeavor dropped out of hyperspace, a sleek coalition cruiser loomed before them, its design a far cry from the cobbled-together mass that was their ship. It hovered there, ominous and elegant, like a predatory bird eyeing its next meal. Captain Zarn, I presume, Verk muttered, swallowing his misgivings. He activated the comms, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. This is Captain Verk of the Endeavor. Thraxon sent us. There was a pause, the kind that stretched out like the moment before a storm breaks, heavy with anticipation. Then the screen flickered to life and Captain Zarn appeared, his expression inscrutable. Captain Verk, he intoned, his voice smooth and calculated. I've been expecting you. Well, we aim to please, Verk replied, his mouth quirking into a half-smile. Heard you might be interested in a little human ingenuity. Zarn leaned back, his eyes studying Verk as though trying to decipher a particularly tricky puzzle. Indeed. I find your kind fascinating. So resilient, despite the odds. Yeah, that's us. Stubborn as a mule with a broken leg, Verk quipped, his bravado masking the nervous flutter in his gut. Thraxon said you might be open to an alliance of sorts, Zarn continued, his tone thoughtful. I'm curious to see what humans are truly capable of when pushed to their limits. Verk exchanged another glance with Jax and Korg. It was a gamble, but one they were willing to take. We're not exactly in a position to say no, Captain. What do you propose? Zarn nodded as if coming to a decision. Meet me on board my ship. Let's discuss how we can help each other. Perhaps together we can turn the tide in our favor. Sounds like a plan, Verk agreed, feeling the weight of the decision settling on him like a cloak. We'll be over shortly. As the transmission ended, Verk turned to his crew, a grin tugging at his lips. Looks like we might just live to fight another day, or find a new way to get ourselves killed, Korg added, ever the optimist. Jax chuckled, slapping Verk on the back. Either way, it's better than sitting around waiting for the universe to finish us off. Then let's not keep our new friend waiting, Verk said, leading the way to the shuttle bay with renewed determination. Time to show these aliens what humanity's really made of. As they boarded the shuttle and set course for Zarn's ship, Verk couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. Maybe this was a turning point. Or maybe it was another step deeper into the mire. Either way, they'd face it together, laughing in the face of whatever the cosmos threw their way. The shuttle ride to Zarn's ship was short, which was a relief, considering the Endeavor had about as much structural integrity as a wet paper towel. The artificial gravity on board barely managed to keep the crew's boots on the floor, and the atmospheric controls had a sense of humor that bordered on sadistic, toggling between freezer-burn cold and the kind of muggy heat that could convince you to abandon pants altogether. But at least it didn't involve explosive decompression. Yet, as they approached Zarn's cruiser, Korg glanced at Verk and muttered, "I bet this guy's ship has more bells and whistles than a carnival. And probably more clowns, too." Verk replied with a smirk, adjusting his captain's jacket as if it could somehow make up for the fact that he was essentially a beggar at a billionaire's banquet. Jax shot them both a cheeky grin, his fingers darting over the controls as he prepared to dock. Let's hope he doesn't have a thing for mounted human heads. They settled into the docking bay of Zarn's ship, which was as sleek and polished as Endeavor was battered and bruised. A welcoming committee awaited them, if you could call a group of stoic alien soldiers holding weapons a welcoming committee. Their expressions were as stony as a graveyard, and just as inviting. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Verk muttered, stepping off the shuttle with the kind of bravado that only comes from having nothing left to lose. "I hope Zarn's hospitality is less about aiming and more about amiable conversation." Korg grunted, following closely. "If not, I'll do my best impression of a human shield." Just don't expect any refunds. The corridor they were led down was predictably pristine, like it had been designed by someone with a fetish for sterility. The lights were too bright, the air too clean, and the silence too oppressive, perfect conditions for a bout of existential dread. Finally, they arrived at the bridge, where Captain Zarn awaited them. He was seated like a king on his throne, his posture relaxed but with an edge of menace that suggested he could go from diplomatic to deadly faster than Verk could say, "We're screwed." "Captain Verk," Zarn greeted, his voice smooth like oil on water, "welcome aboard. I trust your ride over was uneventful." "Almost disappointingly so," Verk replied, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I hear you're interested in what humans can do when their backs are against the wall." Zarn nodded, his eyes glinting with curiosity and perhaps a hint of amusement. "Indeed, your reputation for unpredictability precedes you." "Unpredictability is our middle name," Jax quipped, his hands tucked casually behind his head. "Well, technically it's our only name since our parents were too busy dodging taxes to give us proper ones." Zarn's lips twitched. Whether it was a smile or a sign of impending danger, Verk couldn't tell. "I've called you here because I believe we have a common enemy. The coalition blockade is as much a thorn in my side as it is in yours." Verk raised an eyebrow, playing along. "And you think we can help you solve this little blockade problem?" Zarn leaned forward, his expression earnest now, like a conspirator about to share a particularly juicy secret. "I do. The coalition's strength comes from their predictability. Their weakness, however, is fear. Specifically, fear of the unknown. And you think we can exploit this fear?" Korg asked, skepticism dripping from his words like oil from a leaky valve. "Precisely," Zarn replied, his eyes gleaming with the sharpness of a razor. "I propose we stage an incident that will leave them questioning their own reality. Make them believe there's something lurking in the shadows they can't comprehend." "Smoke and mirrors," Verk said, nodding slowly as the plan took shape in his mind. "But what do we have that can scare them off? Our ship barely qualifies as a haunted house." Zarn gestured to a screen that flickered to life, displaying a schematic of their ships and the blockade. "We'll use the Endeavor as bait. Make it seem as though you've discovered a technology beyond their understanding," Jax snorted. "Considering half our tech is held together with spit and prayers, they'll either think we're geniuses or complete lunatics." "Or both," Korg added. "Usually both." Verk considered the plan, weighing their odds. It was bold, audacious even. But it was also right up their alley, high risk, potentially high reward, and just the right amount of crazy. "All right, let's assume we pull this off. What's in it for you?" Zarn's smile was quick and sharp. "A crack in their armor." enough to force them to rethink their strategy and give us both the room we need to move freely. And if it all goes to hell? Verk asked, unable to suppress his cynicism even in the face of potential victory. Then at least you'll go down in history as the human who made them question their own sanity, Zarn replied with a chuckle. Great, immortality through total failure, Jax muttered, though his eyes sparkled with the thrill of the challenge. Let's get this show on the road, Verk said, clapping his hands together. Jax, Korg, let's give these coalition types something to talk about. As they returned to the Endeavor, Verk felt a surge of adrenaline. It was like the calm before a storm or the moment just before diving off a cliff. The plan was insane, but that was their specialty. Back on the Endeavor, Jax worked tirelessly to rig up a faux cloaking device. The console was already held together with so much duct tape and wishful thinking that adding a few more wires and blinking lights felt like an exercise in futility. Korg, for his part, was busy preparing a series of false sensor readings that would make it look like they had the capability to disappear and reappear at will, an illusion crafted with smoke, mirrors, and more than a little bravado. Verk watched his crew work, feeling a strange mix of pride and trepidation. This was what they did best, turning impossible odds into potential opportunities, even if it meant risking everything in the process. As the Endeavor approached the blockade, the tension on board was palpable. Even the ship seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, its usual creaks and groans quieting as if holding its breath. "Ready to roll the dice?" Verk asked, his voice firm but tinged with the kind of anticipation that could only come from standing on the precipice of either disaster or triumph. "Do I have a choice?" Korg replied, his fingers dancing over the controls, activating the fake cloaking device. "Not if you want to keep breathing," Jax chimed in, his tone flippant though his focus was razor-sharp. With a nod, Verk gave the signal. "Let's show them what a little human ingenuity can do." As the Endeavor slipped within range of the blockade, Korg executed the maneuver, broadcasting the false sensor readings that suggested a cloaked ship with capabilities beyond anything the Coalition had ever encountered. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the kind that stretched out like a dark ocean before a tempest. Then the Coalition ships began to react, their formations shifting with the kind of nervous energy that only came from facing an unknown threat. "They're buying it," Jax whispered, his voice a mix of disbelief and awe as he monitored the Coalition's comms. "They're actually buying it." Verk allowed himself a small smile, though it was laced with tension. "Let's keep them guessing." "Korg, activate the holographic decoys." Korg complied, his fingers moving with precision as he launched the decoys, small, unmanned drones programmed to mimic the Endeavor's false cloaking signature. They zipped around the blockade like ghosts, appearing and disappearing at random intervals. The Coalition ships hesitated, their captains undoubtedly weighing their options against the fear of facing something they couldn't understand. It was enough to sow confusion among their ranks, their previous confidence crumbling like a sandcastle in a storm. "Looks like we've got them rattled," Korg said, his voice carrying a note of triumph. "Good," Verk replied, his mind racing as he considered their next move. "Time to push them over the edge." Jax released the EMP pulse. Jax grinned, his expression one of mischief and resolve. With pleasure, the pulse rippled through space, designed to temporarily disable the Coalition's sensors and communications. It was the kind of underhanded tactic that made Verk's skin crawl with delight, a trick learned from one too many close calls. The effect was immediate. Panic spread through the Coalition fleet, their ships scrambling to regain control. Without their sensors, they were blind, vulnerable to the very threat they feared. Verk seized the moment, his voice firm as he issued the order. "Let's make our exit, folks. We've stirred the pot enough for one day." The Endeavor maneuvered with surprising grace, slipping past the disoriented blockade as the Coalition ships struggled to regroup. It was a victory, albeit a precarious one, but Verk knew better than to look a gift horse in the mouth. Especially when that horse was galloping at full speed toward the horizon. As they sped away, leaving the chaos behind, Verk allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They'd done the impossible, turned the tide with nothing more than smoke, mirrors, and a healthy dose of audacity. "Well, that went better than expected," Jax said, leaning back with a sigh of relief. "I was half expecting to be space debris by now." "Don't jinx it," Korg warned, though his grin betrayed his own sense of accomplishment. Verk nodded, the weight of the encounter settling over him like a cloak. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they'd bought themselves some much-needed breathing room, and in their line of work that was as valuable as gold. "Let's get back to Zarn," Verk said, his voice resolute. "We've got a new ally to deal with, and I'm not about to waste this opportunity." As the Endeavor plotted its course back to Zarn's ship, Verk couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They'd face the darkness and come out on the other side. For now, at least, they'd live to fight another day. And with any luck, they'd give the universe something to talk about that wasn't just their inevitable doom. The Endeavor drifted through the void, a creaky whale amongst a sea of sharks, its hull pathetically patched with what could only charitably be called ingenuity. Captain Verk stood in the cockpit, arms crossed, squinting at the stars as if daring them to twinkle sarcastically at him. The blockade was behind them, a mess of scrambled signals and confused dispatches still echoing through the ether. They'd done it, kicked the hornet's nest, and lived to giggle about it. Jax leaned back in his chair, balancing precariously on two legs like some kind of space cowboy. "So, we're not dead, which is nice. Up for a round of what could possibly go wrong next." Korg, who'd been fiddling with the console as if it personally owed him money, snorted. "I think we won that game by default every morning we wake up." Verk couldn't help but chuckle, though it was a sound more like gravel scraping together than anything else. "Let's not get too cocky. The universe likes to keep us on our toes. Or, in our case, falling flat on our faces." The ship lurched slightly, a friendly reminder from the artificial gravity that it considered functioning a personal favor rather than a contractual obligation. Verk shifted his weight, trying to look composed as he nearly toppled over. "All right, let's get back to Zarn. Time to see if our new friend's good for more than just fancy words and promises." Jax tightened his grip on the controls, eyes narrowing as he guided the Endeavor along the safest route their dubious maps could muster. "Yeah, about Zarn. You trust him, Captain?" Verk shrugged, the gesture more fatalistic than dismissive. "Trust is a luxury, but he's got more to gain keeping us alive than dead. At least for now." Korg leaned back, rubbing his temples as if trying to massage some good sense into them. "Hopefully, his definition of gain doesn't involve us becoming space fertilizer. Let's keep our expectations realistic," Verk replied dryly. "The last time anyone promised me something, it was a 2-for-1 deal on life insurance. I'm still waiting on that policy." Their journey was punctuated by the occasional rattle of the ship, each clank and groan a testament to the Endeavor's resilience, or stubbornness, depending on who you asked. But the blockade was behind them, and for once, the future didn't look like a complete dumpster fire. As they closed in on Zarn's ship, a sleek beast that made the Endeavor look like a rusted tin can, Verk couldn't help but feel a grudging respect. Zarn lived in a world of polish and power, a sharp contrast to their lived-in chaos, yet here they were, part of the same mad game. The docking process was uneventful, which, given their track record, was borderline miraculous. Zarn awaited them in his pristine corridor, his expression caught somewhere between welcoming and wary. "Welcome back," he said, cool as a cucumber surfing on a glacier. Verk nodded, matching Zarn's tone with his own brand of sardonic charm. "We were in the neighborhood. Figured we'd drop by, see if you were still breathing." A ghost of a smile flickered across Zarn's face. "I appreciate the concern. I have news that might interest you." Jax and Korg exchanged glances, the kind of look that said, "Here we go, another round of intergalactic charades." As they followed Zarn deeper into his ship, Verk couldn't help but admire the stark contrast to the Endeavor. Everything was polished, precise, and probably cost more than a year's worth of their ill-gotten gains. It was like stepping into a different universe, one where things worked as intended and surfaces didn't leave questionable stains on your fingers. Zarn led them to a chamber that looked like it had stepped out of a designer's fever dream. Screens flickered with intel strategic maps that looked far too orderly for Verk's taste. "We've stirred the pot," Zarn began, his voice measured. "The coalition's thrown into disarray. They're pulling forces to reinforce the blockade, leaving other routes vulnerable." Verk raised an eyebrow, his suspicion as thick as asteroid dust. "And this benefits us how?" Zarn gestured to a section of the map, a route highlighted in bold. "This corridor is now open for trade, unguarded, for now at least." Korg leaned in, scrutinizing the map with a skeptical eye. "A trap, you think?" "Potentially," Zarn admitted. "But that's where opportunity lies. With the right maneuvering, it could mean a new era for those like us." Jax snorted, crossing his arms. "Hope springs eternal, even in the vacuum of space. You sure you're not trying to sell us on a bridge to nowhere?" Zarn met Jax's gaze, his expression unyielding. "I don't deal in empty promises, only calculated risks. This is a chance to change the game." Verk contemplated the map, the possibilities unfolding like a high-stakes poker hand. "All right, let's assume you're not leading us into the jaws of a hungry alliance. What's the plan?" Zarn leaned back, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "We build a coalition of our own, unify those who've been under the coalition's boot. A diverse front, one they can't easily quash. An alliance of the misfits and miscreants," Korg said with a wry grin. "Sounds like a party." Verk nodded slowly, the idea taking root. A shift in the balance of power, a chance to carve out a piece of the galaxy for themselves. "And all we need to pull this off is every ounce of luck we don't have." Zarn chuckled, a sound like a knife slicing through tension. "And perhaps a bit more, but fortune favors the bold." Jax clapped his hands together, a mock enthusiasm in his voice. "Nothing like revolution to spice up a Tuesday." Verk turned to his crew, their faces etched with the weariness of too many close calls and too few victories. Yet beneath it all was a quiet determination, a shared understanding that this was their shot, their chance to rewrite the rules. "All right," Verk said, his voice steady. "Let's see if we can't turn this broken-down mess into something worth fighting for. Time to see if we can do more than just survive." As they returned to the endeavor, the weight of what lay ahead settled over them like a heavy cloak. But there was also a flicker of something else, a spark of hope, a glimmer of possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could make a difference. Back on board, Jax took his seat at the console, eyes scanning the displays with renewed purpose. "Looks like we've been upgraded from freelancing idiots to aspiring revolutionary heroes." Korg snorted, giving the console a fond pat. "Still the same idiots, just with a fancier goal." Verk settled into his chair, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. It was a long shot, a gamble with odds stacked higher than the biggest skyscraper on New Horizon. But it was theirs. "Let's get to work," Verk said, his voice a quiet command. "We've got a galaxy to surprise." As the Endeavor powered up, engines humming with a syncopated rhythm that was as comforting as it was questionable, Verk let himself imagine a future where their actions echoed beyond the immediate chaos. A future where humanity and its allies could carve their own path, not just in defiance but in unity. For now, though, it was enough to know they weren't alone. That in the vast, indifferent expanse of space, they'd found allies, odd, mismatched, and unpredictable as they were. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And in the ragtag world of the Endeavor and its crew, a start was all they needed to change everything. As they set a course for their next destination, Verk looked out at the stars, each one a reminder of the vastness before them. "Here's to the crazy ones," he murmured, echoing a sentiment as old as humanity's reach for the stars. "May we never run out of ways to piss them off." The Endeavor surged forward, a defiant flicker against the dark. For now, it was enough just to keep moving. With luck and a bit of that human ingenuity, They'd give the universe something to talk about besides their inevitable doom.